Welcome to the Developing Life Podcast. Welcome to episode 10 of the Developing Life Podcast. As the world faces challenges of climate change, innovative solutions are more crucial than ever. How can designers leverage technology to drive sustainable change and create a positive impact on our planet? Today, we are excited to have Brian Stancheski, a dedicated graphic designer and brand strategist whose work is deeply rooted in sustainability. Brian has a rich background in both print and digital design, and he brings a unique perspective to the table by incorporating AI systems into his process. Beyond design, he is a tech enthusiast and a big fan of comic books, finding inspiration in the intersection of technology and storytelling. Brian has earned recognition on prestigious platforms such as USA Today, NYFW, and CES, solidifying his reputation as a leading figure in the field. Brian is also a key contributor to Project Blue Sky, a 2-week design experience to create climate-positive work, and is always open up to collaborations, seeking opportunities to work on projects to promote change. Join this conversation, hosted by Davron Bowman, as Brian shares how designers can integrate AI and sustainable practices, not only to meet, but to exceed our environmental responsibilities.
Thank you so much, True. Amazing introduction. As always, Brian, it is amazing to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time. I know that you have had a very busy past month or two. Just a little background for those of you who are joining us. We are joined by Brian Stancheski. He is the conscious creative. He is a renowned eco-conscious designer. He's been very busy here lately. Just catches up on what you've been into since I think the beginning of April.
I've actually had the opportunity to participate in 2 trainings. One was a workshop retreat that I just came back from, which was Project Blue Sky, and the other was for Climate Reality Project Leadership, which was, I believe, their 42nd climate forum over here in New York City. So yeah, coming off of those 2 big trainings and just trying to expand my knowledge in sustainability.
Yeah, that's crazy. So despite the jet lag, still took the time to meet with us, and I'm so grateful, simply because the topic is very important, and it's going to become even more important the further we move into the future. So our focus today is on how to build a profitable business that is people-centric and planet-friendly. I think that there's almost no one better to guide us in this discussion than you, Brian. To start, can you tell us a little bit about your history as a designer? I mean, you've got a pretty unique childhood. I know you shared a little bit of your story. So why don't you just take us through your journey and what has really inspired you up until this point? And then after that, I'd love to delve a little bit further into some of your recent projects.
Sounds good. So keeping this really short, I've kind of been a creative all my life, but around the age of 7, I unfortunately had meningitis, which I did survive, but it left me with a little bit of a heart side effect. Fast forward to high school, I wanted to play some sports and I wasn't able to because I never could get the clearance. So I had the opportunity to actually start writing for the sports section. That got me some accolades for the first year, and they turned me into the sports editor, which allowed me to start doing section layout, working with Adobe PageMaker for all the OG Adobe people out there. And then after about 20 or 30 spreads for each year that we had, I did that for 2 years. I went to school at St. John's University for a BFA in graphics design and communications. Finally, about 2012, I started my professional career in New York City after the recession with a PR firm working with some major brands. That's when I was working on both digital and live activations for live events and social media activations, which was just becoming a big thing. And then in 2015, after some investors, I got the axe like most creatives. And that's when, with a little bit of inspiration from my wife, I started my business, and I've been doing that for about the last 9 years.
Man, that's amazing, and going strong. That's what, we connected, I guess, two maybe a little over that months ago, and since then you have just been on a nonstop creative journey. So I know that you touched lightly during our introduction about the Climate Reality project that you were a part of, as well as Project Blue Sky. I would love to know a little more about each of those. So can we maybe start with the Climate Reality Project? I know that it's a huge initiative. It's supported by some pretty big names. So why don't you tell us, take us through that journey, and then just kind of convey a little bit of the impact or the value that you took away from it.
Yeah, well, I honestly stumbled upon the form for that, and I just out on a whim decided to apply. And about a week later, I received an email that said I was selected. I was lucky to meet with 3,000 other climate enthusiasts. These were not just designers; these were a lot of them were educators. It was a very large room, and I honestly didn't know what I was getting into. Al Gore came out. I thought he was just going to be like a special speaker. He basically led all 3 days, and between Jerome Foster, Yellow Dot Studios, there was just a ton of different professionals and specialty people that were giving tons of knowledge, even natives. So I learned a lot about just the economic and political side of things. And after that, I basically have decided to help the chapter in my local area, help them with communications and, basically making things look better because unfortunately they don't have design on their staff right now. So that's what I'm helping with them at the moment.
That's amazing. So definitely creating an impact as a leader in that New York City chapter there in Brooklyn. More recently, I guess what you just got off of a plane 2 or 3 days ago from your trip out to Project Blue Sky. So first of all, that's no short trip. You're all the way out in California. So what inspired you to take the journey out there? I know that this is something that you're super excited to speak about because it has been so impactful to you and is so important to our future as creatives, as business owners. So why don't you take us through that journey? And you don't have to hold back. You can tell us about what's influenced your approach there. Did you enjoy the collaborative aspect of that? And how are you going to apply the skills that you learned there to create even more real world impact?
So I'm not going to spill too much because I have a link. We're going to have a live presentation on Monday. So I don't want to give
Okay.
away too much information of the story of this place. But I am part of an organization also in the city where I'm a chapter lead for the climate designers here in the city as well. I've been doing that for about a year and a half. And I had the opportunity to work with Mark O'Brien, who's the founder of that organization, and John Bielenberg, where they have started this Project Blue Sky. It's out in New Cuyama, California, and it's about 2 hours, 2.5 hours north of LA, in the middle of the desert valley.
Wow.
It's very different than Brooklyn. I think I went out there because I wanted to just grow and see what I can do with all of the advisors and professionals that were there. I didn't expect I was going to learn so much from the other people that I was there with, or even just the community itself, like being in that kind of environment. I think there's more people on my block than were in the whole town. So
Wow.
it's completely different than what I'm used to. So I think that's what I went out there looking for, and it wound up being something way more of a larger life-changing experience for me.
Yeah, I know that we had a little conversation before we linked up, and you sent over some points that you were really excited to touch on. One of them really stood out to me, and that was you made a statement about having an adventure in thinking wrong. And I know that there's not too much that you can reveal, but that was such an interesting statement. So can you tell me a little more about that, because it's kind of contrary to what we're all normally exposed to. Like, we're supposed to get things right. So what does it feel like to get things wrong and
So
be
thinking
happy?
wrong, when we first got there, John Bielenberg, he is well-renowned designer, and him and Brent Williams both started Think NATO. And part of this process was using the Think NATO um, kind of framework to start to develop this project. So his first thing was, when we're kids and you ask a group of children, who's an artist here? Most of them are going to raise their hand. And as you go throughout time and the kids get older, it's like school is made to wean out creatives. The creatives get less and less. So he basically says that we create connections in our brain on how we should think, so that when something arises, we automatically have a response. And thinking wrong is kind of asking like, why is this the way that it is? And then trying to figure out a way to change that, because it's only that way because we set up that system. So that's kind of thinking wrong in the gist. Like what is the way that people would normally tell you not to think, but why do they tell you not to think that way?
Which is super important, especially from a branding and a creative perspective in terms of uniqueness, like challenging conventional thinking to see if it still applies or even if that was the right answer or just the one that's been accepted. So that sounds super unique. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. So that's amazing. Um, you mentioned earlier that your wife's support is one of the big things that kind of led you into your journey in sustainability. I know that you're a father as well. So, between family and personal convictions, like what role did they play in kind of inspiring your journey to build a better world and use your design skills for good?
So building a business is to help my family, and to support them. But around COVID, I started just trying to live healthier. I was staying in the house, and in doing that, I started investigating sustainable ways of living and realizing that I was doing a lot of sustainable things already,
Nice.
and then kind of bringing that to the next level. And as I did that, I started reading books. And one of the books that I did read was Green Graphic Design by Brian Doherty. And that's when I started to pivot to business. And it didn't make any sense for me to live sustainably and not try to do something business wise, because ultimately I want there to be a world for my kid to enjoy. And that's really the whole motivation to it. It's like he's not going to have the same kind of planet I had. I'm noticing that I don't have the same kind of planet I had as a kid. So, if he wants any kind of semblance of what the world is today, we have to start doing things a lot different and start thinking wrong about a lot of different things.
Yeah, I mean that definitely makes sense, and that has got to be such a strong motivator, not just wanting to build a better world for yourself, but to be able to pass that on, and not just that, but the example that you're setting. As creatives, we're usually drawn to some of the flashier industries, but this actually has such relevance, and even from a business standpoint, it looks a lot more attractive to investors to know that you're fighting for the good of the world and for a sustainable future. So you just said that when you started your sustainability journey, there were a few things you realized you were already doing. And I know that you and I have had conversations before about the importance of education and awareness being central to starting to develop a mentality of sustainability and kind of realizing that there are things that we might already have some good habits, or it might be easier to adjust than we think. So can you elaborate maybe on what a few of the habits that you were already practicing were that you discovered, and then maybe offer like a couple tips of advice for just easily integrating sustainable practices into daily life?
Okay. I will say that most of them that apply probably won't apply to everyone. I know
Yeah.
a lot of people here are in America, and just the way that we design systems and cities makes it really difficult for any of these systems to actually exist. Luckily, I live in a city that has robust mass transit. So me moving here, I got rid of a car in 2012. I haven't had a car since. And I walk or I bike or I use mass transit to get someplace. If I'm using a car, I'm trying to use a green Uber, or it's an e-car. I mean, so those kinds of things started way long ago. Just riding the train is natural, but that's very, that minimizes your carbon footprint a lot by not driving. So then I started an urban garden, just a small little smart garden in my house. I have lettuce for days. You can take green onions from your house and cut them, and they grow forever as long as you just prune them right. So there's a lot of things that people have lost contact with in terms of just normal practices that our grandmas and our great grandmas used to do that we don't do anymore, just out of sheer convenience. And we forgot those things. So that was another thing, that being over in New Kuyama, they live a little bit in the past and they kind of do some of those things, pickling and jarring. And And that's stuff that everyone used to do at a time, and now no one does that. So, it's living like that is sustainable, and a lot of people don't realize those little things.
Yeah.
Minimizing your food waste, just I'd say the biggest thing is don't beat yourself up about anything. Try what you can. Try it in moderation. My kid, it's hard to wean him off meat, so I've been trying meatless Mondays, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I minimize what I eat in terms of meat, so everyone's not going to be on the same page there. But if we all collectively start doing a bunch of different things, we start building up, a bank. So, that's where I would tell people, if you're trying this for the first time, or you're trying to amplify that in your life, just take baby steps and do what feels comfortable for you.
Yeah. And based on your response, it's amazing to state that it's not going to work for everyone. That's a big point, is that moving into sustainability needs to fit your life. It's much more enjoyable when it's something that, just feels natural, or is very easy to segue into. So beyond your personal adjustments, I want to move into, the meat of this conversation. When we first connected, we talked about selling sustainability and how that is a thing that is oftentimes avoided, like that conversation, especially as a creative, complicating things, maybe not having an idea of how to pitch sustainability, or maybe even being unaware of the impact that we're already having, in a positive or negative way. I know that on your website, you've got a carbon emissions analyzer, and shameful to say my website actually failed the test, so I'm going to have to follow up with you about some adjustments that I can make. But we're moving into the age of AI and more immersive experiences, especially online. So before we move into how we sell sustainability, can you tell us a little bit about the impact that this emerging technology is having, and just kind of make it a little more clear what type of impact maybe we as creatives are having on the environment through the digital tools that we're using?
Definitely. Okay, so first and foremost, designers dictate about 80% of a product's life cycle. So everything from how it's made to, how it's packaged, how that is designed, what is printed on, how it's shipped, how it's used, how it's repaired, how it's thrown out, if it's regenerative. So all of that is decided in product design, industrial design of the thing. So it behooves designers to not think about these things, because if we started to apply that thinking to everything that we're creating, we could already lower our emissions just by trying to do things a little bit cleaner. But then when it comes to, applying different thinking to smaller sets, or maybe not a product, or even, as a lot of people say, well, I have a service. That's not, that's not, that can't have a large carbon offset. Well, you've got digital footprint, which lives on a server, which needs energy to produce. So are you using green servers? Like, is the energy consumption from those servers coming from clean and regenerative energy? So there's a lot to ask on both sides, both physical and digital. When we talk about technology, as you mentioned, I use AI, but I use it very sparingly, because I've asked multiple people in this space how much energy it actually uses, and nobody can actually give me a legitimate answer. So no one really knows how their servers are being powered for these things. So I try to minimize what I need to use for the output in terms of AI, just so that I know I'm not creating a huge carbon footprint, because they need to be super cool, those computers. So I would say just trying to be mindful of what you're creating and why you're creating it. A lot of times people create things that don't even need to be created. And then when you're doing things digitally, like, are you making dark modes? Are you creating system fonts? Like, it's very nice to get all flashy, but if we can just use system fonts like New Times Roman, Garmin, go back to the old school Bedonis, every computer has them. So they don't need to send out certificates for making sure that the font is certified. That's energy consumption that it's shooting out to the server to make sure it's certified and coming back. If your website is all white, go with a dark mode, less energy emission from your screen. So people don't even think about those kinds of things. And then as designers, we all love the pretty stuff. We like the stuff that feels nice, and the printing with the gloss and all that makes paper unrecyclable. So every time you add a finish to the paper, you're making it unrecyclable. And it's not necessary. Like I've heard people say, oh, you need the tangible of the card. Well, then you need to decide what card you're going to use. Like Moo has a card that is made from cotton t-shirts. Now someone would say, well, financially, that's probably way more money than normal. Check the price. It's the same as a regular paper. Same as regular paper. So a lot of the times people don't even know the options they have. And then they just go with business as usual because they don't want to ask, well, is there anything different? Why are we doing it this way? Because we circle back to that why wait question and thinking wrong. So, instead of just taking an extra day or two, you're going to do business as usual because, hey, you made 100 of these cards and you just know this is how it's made and you just do it. So it's a lot of responsibility on designers to kind of start thinking differently on how they approach these projects and how they're creating the solutions for these problems.
That is incredibly enlightening, and you're right. Those are things that I feel like the regular designer, those are a few points that I've not even considered, just energy consumption in home and considering it from both perspectives, not just from the professional and the business, but the end user result, you as a designer throughout your process to develop these experiences. So that is definitely a very powerful point. And it seems like the summary of this is that one of the easiest ways to sell sustainability is to take time to build it into your process so that it doesn't even have to become an extra conversation. Like you can just step in and you can start doing good. You can have systems in place that are causing minimal impact. But now when it comes to bigger corporations, bigger businesses, because of course as creatives, our goal is to grow and to become profitable ourselves, and sometimes that leads to more complex questions. So you've been in this industry for quite a while. What are some of the maybe tougher questions or kind of confrontations that you've had with business owners, or I guess some objections, and what type of communication do you use, or what type of proof or approach do you use to overcome those objections?
So as a climate designer, I haven't been working with agencies for a while, or large businesses. I tend to work with smaller businesses now, but I still run into a lot of people in large corporate settings. And their issue is, well, my creative director won't listen to me. My, whoever high up won't listen to this output. How I like to tell them to approach the conversation is a lot of times the creative director just wants the job to get done. And then they want minimal amount of friction, because that means they have to do more. So like any manager, they just want people to manage the process. So start a conversation with your project manager. They're usually the ones who are going to do the output of whatever you're designing, and start talking to them about how you guys can start saving the company money by implementing different things. Like, again, the paper cost, if you need to print something, is the same. So if you make it where the company can actually save money or make money based on going in with green options, chances are the business, especially a big business, is not going to say, oh, let's do the more expensive thing. They're going to want to go with the cheaper route. So a lot of times, if you approach it that way and you can think outside of the box, and instead of approaching it like, hey, this step and repeat, which is a pure vinyl product, it's going to go use once because maybe it has special brand logos on it. Maybe it costs $800 to print, because it needs however large it is. If you decided to look at how many programs they have in the year and multiply that, and show them that maybe going with a digital signage that can be reused multiple times over X amount of years, and show them the projected savings that they can have, they might bear the cost of the upfront larger expense, because they know in time they're going to be able to save money, which is going to make them look good. Financially, that's what businesses want. So it's about, again, thinking differently about how you approach your job. Yes, you're told to do design, but if you want to start implementing change on that kind of a level in a business, you're going to have to start thinking about the cost of things and how and why things are made, and get a little creative to say, hey, yes, saying $800 versus a $10,000 screen is not the same as saying we're going to save 40 events worth of vinyl, and that's going to cost upwards of 15K or whatever it is. And we're actually going to save 5,000 by buying the digital signage. And next year we're going to be net positive because we still have the digital signage. So it's about trying to approach it differently. And if you make the approach more fiscally beneficial for the company may be more apt to make moves quicker.
Yeah. And that ties in directly to the theme, profitable and planet friendly. So based on what you said, because one of the main goals of this podcast series is to start giving creatives direct answers in how to break through the noise in the digital space, find the right people, and approach the right way. So you're saying in this situation that a project manager is normally the one who's going to be in charge, that normally they're trying to create as little friction as possible. And the best chance that you have of integrating sustainable standards and landing a project as a byproduct is pitching the return on your investment long term. Even if it doesn't make sense right now, does it long term? Does it look better? Does it last longer? Does it start to, does it pay for itself in the future? And generally, if you look down the line far enough, sustainable things like your transition, electronic versus something that's physical, it's just easier. It's built to last longer. So it's definitely an amazing approach. So now looking towards the future, because I know one of the big parts of your job is looking towards future impact. How will something that you do today, impact you, future generations, and the planet 5 years, 10 years from now? So how do you see the future as far as sustainability is concerned? I mean, is it looking bright? How should businesses and creatives prepare for what's coming? And just what do you generally forecast for the industry?
So the IEA, which is basically the International Energy Agency, they say we have all the tech already to minimize our carbon footprint by 50%.
Really?
So if people just started implementing some of these changes, we'd have a large sector of new jobs that would need to be created to fill that kind of transition. So that alone, if you're not in design and you're trying to make a transition from one company to another, that creates whole markets, that by itself. But that aside, I mean, think about it from a company standpoint. Most businesses like Gen Xers 2 years ago, 34% of them would not spend any more money for sustainable products. Now that percentage is 90%. They're willing to spend 10%, if not more, for a product because it's sustainable. And then you bring that into Gen Z, who will represent 27% of the market by 2031. They especially want sustainable companies because not only are they buying sustainably, but they're also checking to make sure a business is acting sustainably if they're even going to work there. So it really is against a company to not think about these things, because eventually the entire workforce is going to be looking to see if you're being sustainable. The entire market is going to be looking to see if the products you're producing are sustainable. And chances are, if you're neither one of those, you're going to get left in some past VHS or Betamax or whatever you want to call that technology that has lost. So yeah, I think it really is beholden on businesses to take the initiative to make those changes sooner than later.
Definitely agreed. So for designers and creatives who are just getting started on their journey, can you kind of share some of your biggest inspirations as far as individuals, perhaps courses or experiences similar to Blue Sky Project? Like, what is a great way to break into this if it's truly something that you are passionate about? What things have helped you the most throughout your career?
Well, Jamie Beck Alexander, we were talking just before, has said that every job is a climate job. That's like her ethos. That's her mantra. So I would say just stop looking at the limitations that you have and start looking at like what you can do within your business, within your community, within your house, and start making those changes for yourself. There's a Venn diagram. You know, us designers, we love Venn diagrams.
Yeah.
That I was shared both at Blue Sky and Climate Reality Project. And it really helps people bring into perspective how they could apply their talents to the climate movement. And it's what brings you joy, what are you good at, and what is the work that needs doing. And in that intersection, that's what you should be doing. So if you're really worried about, you know, social issues, because social issues are still part of sustainability and how the human resource is created and treated on this planet, well, then you should get into some type of litigation or political movements. If you're a designer, then maybe you're designing posters for those movements. And sometimes it requires you having to volunteer. I mean, I'm a volunteer for the climate designers. It's a movement I feel passionate about, and I've met a lot of people through there. So there's those organizations as well, both locally and nationally. Climate Reality Project is another one that has tons of chapters, and they're always looking for help. You can get involved with your kid's school. I mean, there's so many different ways, or you could do like I've done, where I basically have made it a central issue for my clients that, hey, you know, right off the bat, climate is going to be the primary thing here, and everything that we do is going to revolve around that. And again, I apply the same thinking I just stated. I show them how it's fiscally beneficial for them, and a lot of them don't mind making the changes, and they also notice these same things. So they're looking at it from their consumer standpoint, that it's actually something beneficial for their business's brand identity and what they stand for.
I love that. Now, I want to ask you a question kind of on a personal level when it comes to sustainability, because I know that we've had a little discussion about our urban jungles, our urban gardens, and you know, getting into that, it is a little easier to create like sustainable practices daily. I feel like as creatives, we correlate a lot of our habits into our process. You know, for me personally, it's been like you're taking care of living things. It generates a return in the form of nourishing you, you know, definitely minimizing the impact. Have you found that living a more sustainable life has allowed you to create like some unique processes, or do you think that it's caused you to analyze? How do you think it impacts your way to analyze businesses from a purely creative perspective, you know, whether it's sustainable or not?
I think it's a gift and a curse. I mean, when you know, I don't know everything, and I don't pretend to know everything, but I feel like as you learn different things, you know, in how you should be designing, you should be applying those things. So it becomes harder when you know, hey, maybe you shouldn't be using this color so much, or hey, maybe this is not a smart idea to create it this way. Um, and the client wants you to. Sometimes it's hard to have some of those discussions. And especially if they're just trying to get to production, or this is what their business is built on, it becomes even harder to say, hey, we shouldn't even do this. We had a discussion about that with someone from Blue Sky, and she's dealing with a client that they kind of are in a bind because even the product that they need, they not enough is being produced for what it is that they are trying to create. So you run into these hurdles where you don't expect, like, okay, well, yeah, we can do this, but they don't have enough supply for us to be able to create this at scale. So that's where large businesses makes a big difference, because a lot of times they're going to invest in the R&D, either drive down those costs, or at least make that product more affluent for people to be able to get to. So not everything are you going to be able to solve today. And I think you have to be okay with that and kind of make an impact where you see you can make an impact.
I love that. So you're saying it really is a symbiotic relationship between consumer and the general public to start demanding these things more, to just demand corporations and bigger entities take responsibility and start leading the path in research and development to make these things more widely accessible. That's kind of like the cycle that has to occur here. And so now it seems like throughout this conversation, we've touched on how a lot of businesses are focused on pushing through the friction, on pushing projects through, on meeting as little resistance as possible, especially in the day and age that we live in. Everything is moving at a million miles per hour. So to help creatives that are focused on the sustainability industry start identifying brands that could align with more of an ideal client, persona demographic, what do you look for in a great client? Or I guess rather, if you could have like one dream client, what would be, the traits that they had? What would they be doing? What would they be looking forward to doing?
Um, I think as a sustainable designer, climate designer, I would say, it'd be like a Patagonia or some type of a company that is super sustainably minded. Um, that would be the natural answer, but I like a challenge. So I honestly would go like maybe not as far as an oil company because they don't need to have a business around, but somebody who's not sustainable at all. I think when you go in and you can educate the people within a company who aren't even thinking about this type of work, this type of movement, and you can start to make inroads there, you're doing more for the movement and the actual cause than by just going and helping someone who's already, you're kind of preaching to the choir at that point. You know what I mean? So to me, it's about applying this thinking and trying to be real creative on how I approach business leaders and other project managers on how we can best implement some changes that are going to be maybe not as friction ridden as they may expect, and then hopefully that will allow us to start taking on and tackling larger projects that they might have the ability to be able to take on, but you can't really, I think when you scare people too much and change things and vilify people, they kind of shut down.
Yeah.
So like I said, apply where you can, but for me it really would be taking on a project or a client that maybe isn't even thinking of climate at all, and especially that climate would directly affect their business. There's a lot of businesses that don't even think about the ramifications of what's happening to the planet and how it actually would affect either their production value, the logistics that goes involved with that, whether the clients need a certain kind of service. So all of these things affect them, and sometimes people don't really look and connect those dots.
I love that. That's a different answer than I expected to get back from you. But yeah, I mean that's beautiful. And that if you are for sustainability, it is already a challenge. So accept the challenge. Start to affect and impact those businesses that can make a real difference. And that's got to feel like such a huge win too, to go into an industry that has kind of been oblivious. When we think of sustainability, it's not just for the earth, it's for the individual, it is for the business. It has to be that cycle for it to be progressive. So I guess, yes, focusing on the future, is this sustainable for your business? If you don't focus on this now, will investments still come? Will people still buy your product? Like, it's got to start now. All right, one last point before we open this discussion up to the audience. You mentioned this term regenerative, and it's funny because I've been doing some research with the team into sustainable businesses. And normally you get that word sustainable. You get, maybe we're using X amount of trees, so we're making sure that we replace them. And we recently did some research into Gayaki yerba mate, and they actually have a huge regenerative sustainability effort that is built in which they are adding to the good of the planet. Like, they're not just sustaining, they are increasing the amount of good. They are generating more good than they are bad. So can you speak to any other companies that that have similar missions, or what the ultimate benefit of creating regenerative practices are versus just sustainable practices?
I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I've always geared myself as a sustainable designer, and it wasn't until I went to Project Blue Sky that Mark O'Brien presented in his first day presentation. If we're just sustaining what we have right now, and what we have right now is not good. So we're just going to continue keeping what's not good. We actually have to start doing regenerative practices. So I can't right out of the top of my head think of companies that are doing these things. I'm sure there are tons, but I know there's a lot of technology behind mushrooms and seaweed, and just like even the location we were in, regenerative farming practices that is rejuvenating the soil, and it actually absorbs more carbon. So it's not just maintaining the levels that we're at now, it's actually producing things like ecosia. There's maybe is one where you are, it's a search engine like Google, but instead when you search, they fund reforestation efforts. So I
Really?
guess that's a way of regenerative, um, you know,
Wow.
practices. And they've been reforesting Indonesia, Brazil, places here in America. Ecosia, they're a German search engine. So
We'll definitely make sure that we get that noted in the summary and also in the descriptions of this episode, because yeah, I mean, it's little things like that. We all use multiple searches daily, so stepping away from Google or even from Chat GPT for just a little bit to use something eco-friendly, those are just the little adjustments that will add up. Man, that's amazing. And we'll definitely have to reach out to Mark and maybe have you both back or something for a conversation on the future of regenerative business practices. It seems like maybe that is a topic that is just now starting to come to light, and that's one of those very forward thinking and innovative stances that businesses can use to be unique. Um, so we've got a couple of questions that are coming in from
okay.
the audience. Heather would like to know who your top three influences are, and those can be past or present.
Okay, so I'd say number one would be Brian Doherty. If I hadn't read that book, I probably wouldn't have started thinking of things the way that I'm thinking of them now. That led me into a mutual friend, as we both have, Christo, who led me to Annalie Hansen, who's also a strategist. She would probably have to be my second biggest inspiration. And I'm gonna go the cliche route, but I'm gonna say my wife, because if it weren't for her, I mean, she's there in the bad times, she's there in the good times, she understands my struggle, she's there when I'm arguing and I'm mad that people aren't understanding what I'm saying, and she's there to kind of lift me up and keep me calm right before this show. So those got to be my three inspiring people.
You're a smart business owner and a smart husband. I love that. I love that.
Happy wife, happy life.
Yes, sir. Okay, so we've got another question. So we know that you're a part of AIGA, and we know that they are, for those who are unfamiliar, they are dedicated to teaching creatives how to work more with government, media, broadcasting, kind of impact change at that larger level. With everything that you've accomplished over these last couple of months, I know that you've kind of, as driven as you were before, you're even that much more passionate about this mission and succeeding and growth. So do you plan to take on more work with the government or more large scale? You just mentioned that kind of small business is your happy place, but what do you foresee for your future coming up?
Well, I didn't want to tell you this, but I'm announcing that I'm running for president. So
Oh
there you
man,
go.
okay,
No,
you got our vote.
no, honestly, I think my political way will go with Climate Reality Project. They are very much involved in petitioning and kind of making a stance there. And I think again, communication is a big key. So people trust great design and things that look clean. So where I can help apply my skills, again, that Venn diagram, I think I can help them there. I do things politically on the side that I think kind of resonate a bit with sustainability, but not to like a large sense, I don't think. If I needed to be on a campaign, it would be great to be on something. I think we actually are lacking a big social campaign. We haven't had one of those since like the 90s. And I think that would help educate a lot of our country here. So if anybody needs help with that, let me know.
Man, yeah, you were the perfect person for that job. We've got a question coming in from Liesel, world traveler, adventurer. I think you were a part of her podcast episode as well. She is asking, do you bring any that you mentioned reviving knowledge and practices from past times today to become more sustainable and eco-conscious. do you bring knowledge and practice from other cultures into your practice? And if so, how?
For me, when it comes to certain design aspects, I will bring in a cultural spin depending on who it is. And I do like to go back to indigenous tribes. They do have a lot of great colors and great patterns. Unfortunately, as a designer and a very digital aged kind of profession, you don't really run that opportunity to maybe utilize old skills like that. Like maybe I would see like architecture and architectural engineering that would be utilizing like old house building. So maybe not necessarily in the way that I can bring like a full knowledge to, but one thing that one of the people that I was with, Dara, she consistently made it an issue, like a point to always remember about the community and the social aspect about this. We always talk about the earth and the trees and the animals, and that is a part of this, but the human aspect plays a big role in this, and how we treat our indigenous peoples and how we preserve their practices. I mean, it's no mistake that they own 80% of the resources left on this planet. They're doing something right for a reason. So, she was very big about not just going in and offering a solution without listening to the culture and the people within that space. So I think, even as a designer, I think that's probably the best way you can approach this and really keep that old voice or that old tone or some of that old thinking in the process, because you're giving us space at the table.
Love that. Love that. We've also got a question from Cass who asks, is it justifiable to group ESG, environmental, social, and governance together, or should those kind of be separate missions?
No, I think you need to. I think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of people take these issues as one-offs, and they're actually like a three-legged table. Like one doesn't exist without the other, and the table doesn't stand if all three aren't playing in unison. So where some people might say ESG governance would be how you're treating your people and your employees. So, that's part of it, how you're treating your environment. So, and then the social aspect is how you're treating the environments that you're in, the neighborhoods and the societies that you're utilizing, using up resources from. How are you treating all of those things? And all of that applies to sustainability. So the fact that ESG is together, I think you're not holistically approaching the problem correctly if you're not taking all of those aspects into consideration when coming up with a plan, you know?
Can you expand a little more on the social side of things? I know that one of the things that you were really excited about from Project Blue Sky was the magnification of the social impact, the connectivity factor there. So, kind of what responsibility do you think we have, or what adjustments do you think our kind of social dynamic has to make for us to start making like real measurable progress in sustainability?
Well, as we mentioned before, society is designed a certain way, cities are designed a certain way, and now post-COVID, nobody really leaves. So part of Project Blue Sky that was nice was to see that I can at least get in a group of people and still converse. Like it's been 4 or 5 years since that's even happened, where I haven't had to leave my house. So I think that's part of it, is that as neighbors, we're not talking to one another the way that we need to be in order to know what's going on in our own neighborhoods, or to even implement those changes. Because, on a neighborhood level, it's not a one person thing, it's kind of more of a systemic thing. So realizing that, even in a big city or a small town, people just are not communicating with one another. They're not listening to one another either. And I think that creates this kind of hostile environment that breaks down communications within the social structure. And then it makes it kind of hard to get anything done. And, as the saying goes, it takes a village, to raise a kid. It also takes a village to like change how you're, using energy or getting a composting program started in your neighborhood. So it takes a village to like do a lot of these things. And if we're not talking to one another, well, then it becomes really hard isolated, and people then realize like, hey, I'm not doing anything by myself. Well, because we're not talking to one another. If we start, helping one another out, we're going to feel like we're part of a movement, and then we gain some momentum. So I think it's by design to keep us separated, and why a lot of people focus on the planet, is because they don't want to say, hey, guess what, if you guys just got together and started talking about this stuff, maybe you might make some changes that we don't want you to do. So I think this, I was thinking about it before, like, when you mentioned new technology, there was this place that is taking hot air from solar panels, cooling it inside of a box and creating condensation. So it's taking sun and basically creating water. I've never heard of this thing before. Why did I just hear about the earth is going to burn in 10 years. So they just feed you negativity so that you're not seeing the positive things that are actually happening in your community, and you can start implementing them at scale and start making changes. So, I think, there's a lot of systems that come into play, and hence why the ESG thing is connected, because it's not just a single thing that's attacking this. There's a lot of different systems intertwined, so.
Well, definitely. And on that topic of creating kind of more division, it kind of plays right into the next question that we've got from Brianna. What do you think about the privatization of resources like water and electricity? Specifically, she says that it's been reported that companies like Vanguard and BlackRock are buying public water and sewer systems. So what type of impact do you think this has?
A very negative impact. The community we just came from, it's not exactly BlackRock, but it's something. It's big agriculture had tapped into their water, tapped too deep into their water. I didn't even know that you can grade and tell the age of water, but apparently this water is like 30,000 years old that they're sourcing, and they're raising the rate of the water for these people every month because they're just taking too much water. So I think it's a bad thing. There's a movie called 2040 that we were tasked with watching, and in that movie, they talked to this gentleman. He must have been in his 20s or 30s, and he's democratizing power. There's small power sources connected to solar panels in Bangladesh, and they're creating miniature networks that connect to other networks. And all these miniature networks basically create one large network. So I think if we start figuring out ways that we can work with some of these systems to maybe produce some of these batteries, and we'll say, hey, you get some type of a kickback, but we're going to be in charge of running this power system. I think some of these companies won't be afraid of losing their lunch, but at the same time, it gives some power to the people, because the way they showed it, it was like you can donate it to someone who's in a disaster prone area and might need power. You could sell it to your neighbor because you just want to make extra money, or you just want to donate it to anybody who needs power. So it really puts the power in the hands of the person who's gaining all of that. And I really think that as long as we have these really large overbearing umbrella systems still in place, they're not going to let up anything, because they're making too much money. So it's about implementing these smaller changes, these smaller technologies, learning about them, and then trying to get them inside of your neighborhoods to create a case study, basically.
Love that. And so beyond our design and creative careers, to really affect change at a social level, what type of responsibilities do you think that we have, or how can we get involved outside of our creative efforts? I guess in an advocacy manner, or at least in a connectivity manner, to become more aware of the condition that the world is in, as well as the positive and negative future that we could participate or omit ourselves from creating.
Um, that's a very large conversation, probably for a different day, because that's
Okay.
probably like a 2-hour conversation.
Yeah.
But I will say this: I'm not going to tell anyone what level of involvement they should or shouldn't have. Everyone should take on as much as they can. And it starts recognizing all the different systems, like being active in local government is part of it. Being active in your community and talking to your neighbors is another part of it. Knowing what you're voting for, knowing who you're voting for, knowing what your company's doing and why your company's doing what they're doing. Are they doing something, some other country that you don't know about and you really don't want to work with them? So, there's a lot of businesses and companies that are doing good. So don't be afraid to I mean, large numbers of people, 16, 17% of Gen Xers and millennials have switched jobs based off of just how the values of that company were. And another 25% of Gen Xers, of millennials, and 23% of Gen Zers are going to do the same thing. So people are finding new positions. They're making moves based on these companies. So it's just about being a little bit, I guess, brave and kind of throwing caution to the wind. And I think when you make those movements and you make that motion, you learn and you meet new people and you start to get ingrained in other movements as well. So where you think you might start today, you might not end up, and never see yourself having done political activism or changing the way a whole corporate culture is, but just by meeting people. So I'd say just talk. Just talk to people and learn everything you can and teach whatever you learn to someone else. I wholly believe in change through osmosis.
That's awesome. So take those baby steps and be open to, paths that open up until you find the one that really suits your lifestyle and your vision. Wow. Brian, it has been an amazing conversation. I'm so glad that we connected. We always love to empower our guests to make a final statement about where to connect with you, any of the upcoming projects. I know you mentioned what Monday is the pitch for Project Blue Sky. So we've got a few ways that we can interact with you, support you, and keep up with what you're working on. What are some of your favorite platforms to connect on?
I think my favorite platform right now is LinkedIn. You're on here. You can DM me or just connect with me through here. You can always go by the site, biggercreative.com. And I tend to be on Instagram quite a bit. So those are the three. I've got a free assessment. It's not scientific, but if you want to see how you can be sustainable, there's resources. It's all free. Just go onto the site. I sent you the link. And you can start to see how you can make changes. And I give you resources on things that you can learn in terms of a business and how you can start implementing change today on your own.
It's amazing. And again, head to Brian's website. We'll post a link in the description and all platforms. Take that website carbon emissions test at the very least. That is easy. You type in your website address, it gives you some very clear results, and you've got someone who really cares and has been doing an amazing job at creating sustainable brands here to help you if you need it. So thank you, Heather. She's posted it in the description. Bigger Creative if you're here right now. Like I said, otherwise check the descriptions. So Brian, again, thanks for joining us. We'll keep you around for just a second, but thanks to everyone in our audience as well. We've really appreciated your support, your participation. Brian's episode marks episode 10 of the Developing Life podcast, which just wouldn't have been possible without all of you. So thank you very much.